All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and kick things off. Thank you guys very much for joining today. Today, we'll be going over a product demo really tailored for operators in the retail e-commerce and supply chain industries. This is part of our bi-weekly product demo series. This will be recorded, so feel free to share afterwards with anyone else from the team. But without further ado, let's get on into it. In this session here, we're going to start off with just giving you some context on Parabola, kind of frame how to think about the tool before we go into some different common use cases across these industries. We'll really spend the majority of the time today on the product overview, kind of showing you the fundamentals of Parabola and actually building a couple flows live together on the call today. Those will involve parsing a freight invoice and doing a quick little invoice audit, and also some product sales analysis to see month-over-month sales. We'll round it out with a couple minutes for Q&A. And with that, we'll go ahead and jump into it. All right, this is something we ask ourselves a lot internally at Parabola. This is something customers ask us a lot. How do I actually think about Parabola? Is it a BI tool? Is it an ETL tool? Is this something that engineering owns, or is this actually for my operations or supply chain team? If you take nothing else away from this conversation, I want you to remember that Parabola really was built specifically for operators who are coming from a world of living in spreadsheets, probably don't know a ton or any code, SQL, the ins and outs of a tool like Power BI or Alteryx, but these are really masters of their process, know SOPs inside and out, and are really savvy kind of hacking things together in spreadsheets. Now, when we think about kind of the best use cases for Parabola, there are usually a couple themes that stand out. And these are things that you can kind of start looking for in your day-to-day when you're thinking about different process improvement and automation opportunities here. So Parabola is going to be best deployed in situations, a lot of times where it's hard to access data because it's spread across so many different sources that require so many clicks to get to. And then even when you get to that data, a lot of times it's not in the actual format that you need it in for your internal reports and processes. So maybe you have data spread across an ERP, you have some emails containing PDF invoices, then you have data in Shopify, in Loop returns, and your job as an operator is to kind of stitch together this data from all of these different places, while in the process constantly needing to clean data, to get it all into the format you need, and just do all of those monotonous steps that really shouldn't be taking up the majority of your day-to-day. Now, once all of that data is aggregated, consolidated in a nice clean format, best Parabola use cases are usually processes that are really complex and custom to your company's kind of internal logic. This isn't something more like Zapier, where it's like a point-to-point integration where I need to take data point from here and pipe it into here. Those are definitely things that Parabola can support, but what we're really great at is taking that complex logic and turning it into really nice documented workflows. Now, beyond your kind of standard, let's call them processes, Parabola also really stands out with workflows that involve a lot of edge cases where you're always kind of doing that double check manually to see, oh, do we have to go clean this data? Do we have any exception cases, duplicates? I've heard of teams using like a highlight to go manually review certain cells. Those are the types of things that you can build into your workflow, really capture all of those edge cases over time, and slowly knock out all of those different exceptions. We also see a whole bunch of different kind of audit related use cases. So that might be something like an invoice audit for your 3PLs or freight carriers, or maybe you need to make sure that orders and shipments are tied out every day. And so you're constantly kind of doing these audit flows. Now, to round it out here, we're talking about processes that are really happening at scale, often happening on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, maybe every single time you receive an email from a carrier. If you have any processes that are kind of living in spreadsheets, PDFs, happening frequently and kind of checks these boxes, a good chance it's a good use case for Parabola. Now, just to frame a little bit, like where do we actually see these problems bubbling up today? First, to start with e-commerce and retail teams. Obviously, this is pretty broad here, but I think speaks to the flexibility of Parabola. frequently see these processes happening in things like freight audits, maybe duty drawback, a whole bunch of different inventory reconciliation types of use cases where maybe you have inventory levels spread across multiple 3PLs and you need to consolidate a lot of that information. As you can see here, really anything that's currently happening in a spreadsheet makes for a really good use case for Parabola, and not too dissimilar from some of the freight and logistics use cases that we see that are a lot of times really focused on a lot of the nasty PDFs that you might receive from customs or different carriers where we need to parse a commercial invoice or packing list. Maybe we need to audit different invoices to make sure that we're getting paid on time. We see a whole lot of different exception and alerting-based use cases. But as you can see, a pretty broad range of use cases here being supported by Parabola. Now, to keep things rolling and show you what it means when we say, hey, we can support something like analyzing product sales over time, want to jump into a little demo here, give you an overview of the tool, and do some live building. All right, cool. So to get started here, let's talk a little bit about the fundamentals of Parabola. And so at its core, Parabola is the tool where you can kind of combine all of the data running throughout your company and create automated processes. A lot of our customers will think about these as agents that can take these really complex operational tasks. You kind of build it out once, and then it handles it forever for you without you needing to get involved. Now, to actually build a Parabola flow, there are really four types of steps that we're going to use to create these automations. As I go up to my integrations tab in the top left here, you'll see that we can get started by pulling in data from a variety of different data sources. So imagine you're not just using Shopify or NetSuite, but probably have data spread across a lot of different tools. And in a perfect world, your tech team has consolidated everything in your ERP. You don't have to go looking for different data, but have almost never met a team that actually has all the data easily accessible in a place that they need. So, maybe we're pulling from places such as more standard options, I guess you'd say, like things like NetSuite, Shopify. Maybe you also need to do things like pull in data from email attachments. That could be a CSV file, Excel, even PDF files. Really, wherever you need to go pull that data, Parabola either has a native integration where we can go pull in that data, or can do things like pull from emails, pull from APIs, and those APIs, which we always help configure, are really helpful for kind of the long tail of different WMS systems, maybe different shipping platforms that your 3PLs are using, so on and so forth. Once we kind of consolidate all of this information across all of our different data sources, the next step in Parabola is to actually clean, transform, combine all of that data to kind of make sense of it in the kind of unique way for your company. So as I scroll over to our transforms tabs here, you're going to see we have a whole bunch of different kind of drag and drop steps that probably mirror things that you're currently doing manually in the spreadsheet. So you can imagine you receive that report from your 3PL. You need to go in and edit some of your columns. Maybe you delete some columns, you rename some columns. Then we might need to do things like filter down our data set to only show, products with a certain SKU or something of that nature. Then maybe we need to do a little combine step here where we're combining data across our ERP and Shopify. Maybe we need to do a little math step to find if there are any discrepancies. And really, as you can see here, any kind of thing that you would do in a spreadsheet, maybe you need to remove duplicates. We're going to have steps for all of those things in Parabola. And what's really nice is you can always kind of search for keywords that you're familiar with from your process, and will probably surface the familiar step. So, maybe you're doing a dreaded VLOOKUP every single time you do this report. If you search for VLOOKUP, you're going to see the steps in Parabola that kind of mirror that same logic. Awesome. Now that we have, all of our data pulled in, we've transformed it all, the final step here in Parabola is to actually send that data off wherever it needs to go. So this could be something like a Parabola table, which are going to be kind of databases that live within Parabola and ultimately allow you to create really engaging visualizations and dashboards. So that could look like something like this, where we are analyzing freight invoices and we want to report on the average surcharge rate difference, our total fuel charges across all of our invoices, and then maybe we want to visualize differences in spend over time. Or maybe it's something like an inventory dashboard where we can go and see all of our SKUs that we need to go ahead and reorder. Maybe we want to create some different visualizations to see, products across different sales channels. Really, whatever kind of custom view you'd want to create that maybe historically you've had to ask your IT team to build in Power BI or Looker. You can kind of come in here as an operator familiar with spreadsheets and build all of this yourself in Parabola. Now, beyond being able to send to Parabola tables, you really have a whole suite of different options here for where you actually send that data off. So maybe you need to update a Google Sheet or Airtable on a recurring basis, send files back to SharePoint. We have a whole bunch of customers ending their flows by either sending an email or a Slack message, especially for exception cases where, maybe an order is about to pass its shipping SLA and you want to Slack the team to make sure you contact your 3PL to figure out what's going on. Really, wherever you need to send that data, you can build these custom flows and make sure it runs on a recurring basis. Now, very last step before we do some live building, we really believe that a process is only as good as its documentation. And so beyond just actually building all of these different workflows, you also can add some robust documentation here as well. So maybe I want to add these steps to a card. I'm going to go ahead and name this card, pull data from NetSuite. And then maybe I have some notes here about cleaning data and doing other things so that if someone else from my team comes into this flow, they can read my notes, they know exactly what I was doing throughout the process, and it's really easy to kind of document your work as you go. All right, now let's jump into some building here. First one that we're going to look at is this step here, where we're trying to answer the question of how did product sales change month to month? Now, what we're doing here is within that integrations tab, we also have a step called use sample data. Realize that maybe you want to test Parabola, you don't want to share all your data right off the bat. You could go ahead and look at example data from Seller Central, Klaviyo, Loop, NetSuite, Shopify, so on and so forth as you get started. So in this example, I'm pulling in some sample e-commerce orders. I have 20 rows of data here showing me things like order number, customer ID, so on and so forth here. Now, whenever we're working in Parabola, first thing I always recommend is to make the data as clean as possible before we start doing additional transformations. And one of the most helpful steps for doing that is going to be our edit column step. Now, in this example, I don't actually need all 20 columns of data here. So I'm going to say instead of keeping all these columns, let's just keep these specific columns. And now maybe I want to keep information like our product title. I want to keep our line item price, and I want to keep our units sold for this example. If I wanted to rename or reorder, could do that here as well, but I'll just go ahead and hit show updated results. Everything will kind of calculate right in front of you, and you'll see that we now have our kind of cut down data set here. If we really want to find product sales over time, it also would be helpful for us to find revenue here beyond just line item price and units. And I'm also going to add my date field here. And so the next thing I'm going to do is just calculate the total revenue for each of these orders that we're looking at here by doing price times unit. So I can go ahead and search for map. I'll go ahead and add a map column to my data set. And I'll name this column revenue, where I'm doing my line item price column and multiplying it times our units sold. As I hit show updated results, you'll see we have a new column added to the right-hand side of our data set here, and we're all set. Now, next thing we need is you can see we have orders spanning from January through April. And so instead of just having this kind of nasty date format here, as I'm sure you've experienced anytime you've received data from an external partner, I want to go ahead and get that data in a nice standardized format for us here. So if I just search for format, you're going to see some different options. I'm going to go ahead and use our format date step here. And as I click in, if you're familiar with Parabola, you'll see the step is brand new. We can go ahead and select what column we want to reformat. So I'll just say order date. And now what we need to do is just specify the starting format and the ending format for this data. as I click in here, you're going to have some different options for how the data is currently formatted. But one thing that's really cool here is I can hit this auto detect format button. Parabola is going to use AI to analyze the format of all of the dates in that column. It's going to say, hey, this looks good. And then we can just go ahead and select the new format that we want to use. So maybe I want to use something like April 2024 looks great. I'll go ahead and hit show updated results. And now we can see we have reformatted that order date column. Beautiful. All right, so now we have everything we need to kind of roll up our data and help us answer this question of how did product sales change month to month. And so you can imagine creating something like a pivot table in Excel. Maybe I'm going to create a new card, calculate, can't spell, calculate sales. And then we can go ahead and use our sum by group step here to help us find a rolled up data. So I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, let's sum our revenue column. Let's group it based on our order date and our product title. We can hit show updated results. And now you'll see we have a nice rolled up data set here. All right, last thing I want to do is give this some formatting here. So I'm going to search for format one more time. We can go ahead and format our numbers. And now we'll just format revenue as currency, show updated results. And we have a really nice, neat data set here. Now, to really round out this flow, maybe we want to now export this data by sending it to a Parabola table. So instead of just sharing this with the team, you probably want to share a dashboard that's a little bit more engaging and kind of helps you visualize big picture here. So once we actually run this, it would output something that could look like this, where maybe I want to track total revenue from all these orders. I want to see how many SKUs I sold over this period. And then maybe I have a filtered down view to just look at our women's products. I can see kind of trends over time and how sales changed. So we can see we have the performance leggings really spiking over the last couple months. We can also see total sales by revenue. Maybe I want to break down monthly sales based on product, and I actually want to remove the beanie from that. You can kind of create some different custom views, however you want to view this data here. Awesome. Now I'm going to keep rolling and we can check out our next example here. This one's going to involve actually working with some PDF data here. So what we're going to be looking at here is our Parabola Logistics freight invoice. We can see all of our different charges down at the bottom here. And on page 2, we also have our total here. So the question that we're asking here is, do all of these charges on our invoice actually total out to the total that we have on the second page of our invoice? Now, I've gone ahead and cheated a little bit here by preloading this PDF, but Parabola makes this really nice and simple. You can kind of view your PDF right in Parabola, and we're going to use AI and computer vision to analyze this PDF and make it really easy for you to pull the most important data right off of that PDF without having to map a bunch of different fields and do a ton of configuration. So all I did here was from all of the different tables of data the AI detected on this PDF, I just said, hey, give me the charges table. And then it said, all right, you got your descriptions, you got your charges, and then there were a couple other data points that I specified. So I also want our invoice number. And to kind of train the AI with examples, I provided an example invoice number here. And then we're also grabbing things like invoice date, due date, and then we have our total in US dollars here, which you'll notice this 182 repeating across all these rows. That is coming right from the second page of our invoice here. All right, so now the challenge is I need to sum up all of these different rows of data and then compare it against our total to see if there's a discrepancy. First thing I'm going to do is just sum up all of these charges. So similar to what we did above, I'm going to search for sum. We have this sum by group step here. And I'm just going to say, let's go ahead and sum up our charges. And now for our grouping, I'm actually going to group it by our invoice number. So I just only want one row of data showing me my invoice number and my total charges. Beautiful. Now we'll worry about formatting and all that good stuff at the end, but now we can see our total charges here. Everything looks good. All right, cool. Now we want to basically just get our total in the same row here, and then do a little comparison. So there's a few different ways to do this, but I want to show you how we kind of combine data in Parabola. So I'm going to go ahead and use an edit column step and kind of create a different branch here in the flow where now I'm just looking at our keeping the rows for our invoice number and our total. Show updated results. We're going to have this repeating a whole bunch of times. I don't want all of that data, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove duplicates to get rid of some of the duplicate rows there. Beautiful. So now I have my invoice number, I have my total in USD. Now we kind of have, you can think of this as two different tabs in a Google Sheet, for instance, and we need to do the equivalent of a VLOOKUP based on invoice number. So just matching these two data sets. To do that kind of match, we're going to go ahead into our transform section. And when we're working with tables of data, we can go ahead and either stack data by putting one table on top of another, or we can do something like a combine, which we're going to do here. Now I'm just going to plug in my arrows. We're going to have to specify how we want to join this data. Basically, what is our unique identifier? So I can say, hey, we have an invoice number in one table. We have an invoice number in another table. And now when I show updated results, we'll just get everything into one nice consolidated data set here. Beautiful. All right, I always find it helpful to rename my columns to make it really easy to follow as we go. So maybe I want to rename this to be, our line item total. And then we have we'll just keep that as our total. And then we can go ahead and start doing some math to find the discrepancy, which we can see exists here. So I'm going to go ahead and search for math. We can go ahead and calculate a column called discrepancy. And now we're going to do our total in USD, or, let me do our line items total minus our total in USD, show updated results. And now we can see on this specific invoice, we had a $12,000 discrepancy, which we're going to want to make sure we handle here. Last step, I can go ahead and format our numbers. So we'll just make everything nice and neat here. We will format our line item total, our total USD, and our discrepancy all in currency, show our updated results, and we have a nice clean data set here. Awesome. From here, we might want to do something where we're also calculating a percentage and saying, hey, only alert the team if this discrepancy is over 3%. And then we can do something like, let's keep rows where our discrepancy is greater than or equal to 3%. In this example, I'll just call it, $1,000, show updated results. It's going to keep this row. And then maybe I want to go ahead and send an email to the team so I can email that CSV attachment. Maybe I want to include a link back to the initial PDF, but hopefully this gives you a good sense of kind of how we can build out different workflows in Parabola. Now, with the last 5 minutes here, do want to leave some time for some Q&A. So if you do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat now, and we'll take a minute to answer some of those. All right, while we're waiting for some questions here, we'll speak to some of the maybe more interesting flows that we've seen over time at Parabola. Would say one of what I would call probably like the most common flow that almost every team within e-commerce retail has is this idea of reconciling inventory across your WMS, your ERP, and a sales channel like Shopify, and then finding if there are any discrepancies in those inventory levels. We've seen teams have pretty massive stockouts and discrepancies that cause a lot of revenue leakage because of different issues in the supply chain. We also see, I have a question here. Can you set flows to run at a specific time? Awesome question. So we'll just, if we go into kind of the live view of a flow, we actually can set flows to run on a recurring schedule. So if we hit this add schedule or trigger button here, we can say maybe we want this flow to run every single day at 8 a.m. or maybe, every 10 minutes, every 30 minutes, every time we receive an email. So have a couple of different scheduling options there. So you can run that flow at whatever cadence you'd like. Awesome. Yes, the question here about running an inventory report at 11:59 every day, absolutely can do something like that. All right, to round us out here, we'll talk a little bit more about how you can learn about Parabola. And so the best way to ultimately learn is to be diving into the product, testing it out yourself, pulling in some data, recommend getting started with a CSV file. And you can do that right on a free trial when you sign up for Parabola. We also recently launched Parabola University. And so this provides you with both sample data and then some kind of building challenges that you can do throughout the course to really help you get some practical experience in the tool, learning about the most common data transformations, how to create those different dashboards and visualizations that we were looking at. But highly recommend as you kind of get started with Parabola. And finally, we're always happy to kind of do a more personalized demo to your team, let you know if some of the use cases you have in mind are actually a good fit for Parabola. And if you have any feedback on this session today, you can definitely feel free to shoot me an email, ask any questions. More than happy to chat. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. So really appreciate you all joining for today's session. Definitely feel free to reach out if you have any feedback and hope to talk to you soon. Thanks a lot, everyone.